We are on advocacy tactics today, and that's picking up from last week around the persuasive strategies, right? There's a little bit from last week I want to just recap and mention. So I'm going to actually go up on our deck here a little bit. Let me see if I'm in the right place to do that. Yeah. So a couple things. First of all, I just want to make sure everybody knows we're going to put out what it's called, the Environmental Forum Notebook. With a lot more detail about the public narrative and where to learn more and research more. But just to make sure you all know, in case you want to look it up, this comes from a professor at Harvard University, who I mentioned but didn't name. And if you're interested in learning more about his work, his name is Marshall Ganz. His last name is G-A-N-Z, or you can just look up public narrative and you will find his stuff immediately. He has been just a real powerhouse in terms of making a lot of advocacy strategy work available to organizations. And so you can find his things freely available to learn more. And I was talking with some board members about seeing if we can at some point find a more in-depth training on public narrative. Some of these slides are drawn from a training that I and some of my staff did with, Marshall Ganz himself wasn't there, but with some of the groups he'd trained. And it was a week long. And so we're in our 90 minutes getting an incredibly condensed version of something that can be expanded on a lot. So I encourage you all to look up Marshall Ganz or public narrative if you want to learn more. The other thing just to mention, because we didn't get to it last time, and we're not able to practice this as well on Zoom, is persuasive listening. So you might remember we had this thing about the listening continuum. And from one angle, we can look at that from the idea of critical thinking. Are we truly listening openly and objectively to what people are saying? And it can be a tool for persuasion as well, because if we are truly listening openly and sort of being in connection and being in empathy, people can tell, especially if you're in person, less so perhaps on Zoom. And it can help you find those possible areas of alignment and agreement. It's essentially, you want to do some of this listening to build rapport and to ultimately put together what's going to become your story of us, if you remember this from last week. So where you start to say, I've heard you, I understand what matters to you, this is where you and I can be on the same team around this issue. It comes from doing some really good persuasive listening in one form or another, whether that's in person, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's by reading some of their materials, but you want to really make sure you've fully heard what the people you want to persuade think and especially feel about the issue or the values attached to the issue. So anyway, just a little bit of a winding back to some of that stuff we didn't get to last week, and then moving forward into tactics. So this is the action part of things. Remember this part, right? This is more or less what we've done with our 3 classes. The first one, we did just a recap of what critical thinking is, how to bring in strategy, logic, cold, dispassionate analysis. Last week is how to bring in emotion, how to, stir a reaction in the people you're looking to persuade, and what kinds of reactions we might be seeking. Today is about action. So it's about the specific strategies we might take. There's a little bit more sort of figuring out the pieces that we're going to work on today. And we'll do that with Johnny leading us through some of the research he's done on the issue of small off-road engines in San Rafael. And then there will be some breakout work for you to work on whatever issue you choose. If you want to continue to work around the small off-road engines, you could add additional thoughts about what might be there. Or if you're working on an advocacy issue that you're passionate about for your own reasons, that's going to be your time to work on that and start to apply these strategies to develop an action plan for your particular advocacy issue. So that's where we're headed. Let me see. So this next piece here is called power mapping. And this is what I'm going to have each of you do on your own advocacy project. me just explain what it is conceptually, and then we're going to go into Johnny's research around the San Rafael issue, or small off-road engines in San Rafael. Here are a couple of things. We mentioned some of this last week, but to do power mapping, you need to identify the advocacy target. And an advocacy target is ideally not just an institution or a body, but a specific person, a human being within that institution or body who you think is persuadable, where you think advocacy can persuade them, ideally, to be not only supportive of our issue, but so supportive and so moved that they're actually taking action, which is a whole different game than just getting them to express support. Or in some cases, your advocacy target may be somebody you're looking to move into inaction, somebody who has been steadfastly opposed to the thing you want, and you want to get them to halt their opposition. Even if you can't swing them completely into your point of view and be supportive, you can potentially get them to be less active in their opposition. So, specific individuals. So for those of you who are working on another advocacy topic, you may not know the answer to this, but I will encourage you, before doing your actual advocacy in the world, to make sure you've identified the specific individuals who have the power to make change on your issue. Power mapping is what happens around that individual. So we'll do this in a minute, but it's basically to say, you likely are not going to be the most persuasive or influential person over this person you want to have change their mind. There's a good chance they don't even know you. They're not likely going to trust you. So to the degree you can, you want to figure out who is around this person and who has influence over them, whether that influence is in support of our perspective or in opposition to our perspective, and then start to not only engage the individual who you hope to move on your advocacy issue, but start to engage the network of people around them so that they're also engaging and exerting their influence, which is going to be more than yours, on the person you're looking to persuade, who might be the leader of a town council or a corporation or something like that, right? So that's what this is about. Who are the people that are supportive and how much influence or power do they have? We basically turn this into a map around how much support these people have for our perspective, how aligned are they with our perspective, and how much power or influence do they have over our target. So with that, we're going to move into our case study around small off-road engines and the possibility of a particular councilwoman in San Rafael being somebody who we could persuade to move from being supportive to potentially being much more active and really accelerating some of the things that can be done around small off-road engines within her jurisdiction, which is San Rafael. So let me see, adjust things here so I can get out of slide mode. Stop share. Okay, great. So Johnny, all yours. Why don't you walk us through the people you researched, remind us who it is that's at the center of your power map. Who is it that we're mapping around? And yeah, go for it. It's all you.
All right. Well, if you recall, last week we talked about a city councilwoman of San Rafael. We are focusing around trying to pressure the city into moving forward our interests in phasing out small off-road engines. And so we kind of agreed that Marin in general was pretty in favor of this idea, but we wanted to see how we could pressure Point to move it faster and to make sure that more counties in Marin stood firmly behind this issue, right? And so the councilwoman we picked, let me see if I can share my screen, is a lady called Micah Lawrence Gulati. She is one of the 4 council people of San Rafael. And she has a whole bunch of other stuff that she does. She's a very successful person. In general, we thought that she would be pretty in favor of our request of moving this forward. So the work that I did was kind of look into her a little bit more and see, well, first of all, if I could talk with her. As you can see here, she works primarily as outside of city council as the executive director of Slide Ranch, which some of you might be familiar with. So if you give this a kind of a quick view, you can see a little bit more about the person we're talking about. So real quick, the idea was to see how we can create a larger narrative to see who it is and creating a power map around this lady, right? Who can we talk to? How can we get the story? And all towards the ultimate goal of moving forward our idea of phasing out off-road engines, right? So let me tell you that story really quickly. Oh, there it is. So influencing the City Council of San Rafael. There are going to be influencers that support our agenda of phasing out off-road engines. For example, and this credit goes to Kim and Karen for their ideas, because they're insiders, they know a lot of people. And so I did a little research on some of these folks. For example, Corey Baitoff. He is the program manager of sustainability in the city of San Rafael. So if you look him up, he comes up as the manager that is in charge of a lot of really cool things that San Rafael is trying to do. For example, they have a 2-year action plan that includes promoting the Electrify Marin, which if you look a little farther into it, is pretty much phasing out small off-road engines and other such efforts that moved away from gas, right? San Rafael in general met some pretty big goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and stuff like that. So what pressure points can this guy have over our councilwoman, right? One is he's current active, he's a leader in the county, and he clearly is, like, since he's the director or the manager of sustainability, is mission aligned with our idea of reducing gas consumption, greenhouse gas emissions. So another question we could ask for him is, what is preventing San Rafael from running only electric machines instead of SOARs, small off-road engines, right? And see if he can be part of this conversation for us. So he would be an ally in our effort. Next person, I'm just kind of running through these. You don't need to remember them all, but they're kind of important context, right? So Bill Carney is the president of Sustainable San Rafael. I don't know, I'm not super familiar with it, but I looked into it a little bit, and he seems like he could be an advocacy ally. They are a group of people that seem to be pressuring for a similar end to us, right? They could help us gain critical mass. We could put out signatures, ask for volunteers. We could kind of join forces, right? And the more folks interested in pushing this forward, the more people are willing to do the work and talk to this councilwoman. If you go in at the end, we're going to put this presentation online, and you can click all these links and see more about these people if you'd like to get more informed. So other information, there's Charles McGlashan. He unfortunately died an untimely death, but he was a big advocate for championing Marin's energy independentization, if that's a word. So getting Marin to source its own energy from more clean sources and stuff like that. And so kind of bringing up this guy who is no longer around is a way of kind of pressuring an emotional kind of historical standpoint, because he was a great champion for moving these ideas forward that could be a form of utilizing, we could use this idea of us being interested in continuing his work, right? And Greg Brockbank I called a couple hours before this presentation right now, and to ask more information about where the Small Off-Road Engines Act is. Kim and Karen gave me his name, and he had so much information. I couldn't even write it all down, but he would be a person that could help. If he had time, he could come sit down with us and maybe the city councilwoman and be the historical context for a lot of these things, right? So we're putting together a team, and these are some of the characters that could be our allies. Now, influences that are not so interested in phasing out small off-road engines, right? This is a little more complicated because nobody's going to come up to you and tell you, yeah, I'm not interested in being more sustainable, right? So you have to look into kind of different motives, look into kind of what is in the background, right? So this was a little hard for me to find, but one thing that Greg Brockbank mentioned was that PG&E historically was pushing strongly against Marin becoming energy independent and sourcing their energy from different sources, maybe more clean sources, right? And why does PG&E oppose this small community gaining control of its energy? Because PG&E depend entirely, their core existence is on owning a lot of the market of energy and providing those services, right? And I'm not saying that they're doing a good or bad job or anything, but they might be a character that we have to contend with because they have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, and they are the ones that provide the electricity. Now, Trevor and I were talking about what would PG&E feel about our request or our push to phase out small off-road engines, right? One is they might be in favor because despite being historically someone who's not interested in small communities gaining energy power, they provide an energy, right? So if we're trying to run more machines off of electricity, it could benefit, it could be something PG&E could get behind, right? So that we can talk about more in small groups. Now, the last couple ideas is Marin Clean Energy was a group I wanted to put right under PG&E because this is the energy company that's providing a lot of electricity in Marin. And they're pretty interesting in how they provide the energy, where they source it from. And it's very impressive as an example of a small community gaining this energy power, right? So we need to set it kind of in creating this context, we need to set it right next to PG&E. Now, all of that comes together to, oh, sorry, I forgot. Barbara Heller, the last character I'm going to bring up, was a long-term San Rafael councilwoman. And she, Greg Brockbank mentioned, was opposed to Marin becoming energy independent and possibly opposed to the idea of small off-road engines phasing out because of the financial risk. And this is something we have to bring up because there are always going to be members of the community who are interested in not just looking at what is environmentally necessary, but what it entails across the board. And a lot of the language we have to use is to communicate with people like this who are interested in a very big picture, budgets, how we're going to implement it, who it affects, what kind of industry is in the game. So this is an example of a person who probably knows a lot about the community and has reasons that are probably very valid reasons for opposing something that we're moving towards, right? So we need to take it seriously, and we need to be able to listen carefully to someone like Barbara Heller, who is in this position of power. So anyway, that's kind of my map.
Thanks. And let's before we get to the map part,
yes,
let me just sort of say a couple things. So this is the kind of research you would want to do on the issue you're wanting to do advocacy on, right? So you're looking at who are the really important players. The PG&E one's an interesting one because they're such a powerful player and we're not sure where they stand. We could potentially, I mean, much as you might not like PG&E on some other issue, they're an example of a group who, if you could swing them into action on this, could be hugely influential. If you were to have them, for example, look up how much money they stand to make If instead of gasoline powering all the leaf blowers and lawnmowers, it's electricity, you might be able to really move them into action here, which would be cool. So this is the kind of thing you want to look for. There are a few others that we didn't get a chance to look up that I want to just mention, and then we're going to go to the power map, and then we'll go to our small groups, and you all can work on your own power maps. So as we're looking at this issue, we want to think, who are the biggest potential winners? Who are the biggest potential losers if our desired action happens? One potential really big winner is PG&E. That's why I mentioned them in that context, right? They stand to make a lot of money. Also, potentially the manufacturers of electrical yard equipment could stand to make a lot of money. So those are some potential big winners. There's some others that we didn't get to map, but I want to mention. So a lot of the health impact of small off-road engines falls on the people who are operating them. In the case of Marin, that's going to be disproportionately the Latino community. It's going to be those who work in landscaping companies. It's essentially the staff of that. They probably, conceptually, would be very much in support of having cleaner, quieter machines to use, but may not have some of the knowledge around the actual health impacts of the machines they're using, and maybe really hesitant to be oppositional to the owners of the landscaping companies, who are probably going to be our most entrenched, most opposed to this particular thing, right? Because these are the owners of landscaping companies have put potentially a lot of money into buying a bunch of gas-powered lawn equipment, and would have to put a lot of money into replacing it all with electric if this legislation passes. So anyway, we didn't research those as much because they're more complicated. We wanted to stick with a few individuals. Thanks for doing that, Johnny. So let's go to your map. Go ahead and go back to share. And
so the map is kind of putting these players on a very simple continuum. On the left-hand side, there's influence from high to low. How much power, how much sway do these people have over our city council or our city councilwoman? And then on the top, it's support. A lot of support towards what we're trying to advocate for, or little support, right? So you can see on the top, there's lawn and landscape companies, like Trevor mentioned. Maybe they're not so interested in spending a lot of money to buy new kind of equipment that run on electricity. PG&E, it might be pretty supportive, or not so much if an alternative energy company stands to gain. Who knows? There are big players we can talk to, right? Corey Bytoff, the manager of sustainability in the council, he could be very supportive and have a lot of influence because he knows this person. So you can kind of put your players inside of this landscape.
right. So what I want all of you to do is pull out a piece of paper, if you like pieces of paper, and a piece of computer, if you prefer pieces of computer, and draw a map like this, just a simple 4-box grid. And just like this, you've got support and influence as your two axes. You're basically building a graph of sorts of where people lie. When you're drawing it by hand, you can get more specific, right? So we could decide that Corey Bytoff is extremely supportive, in which case he would go all the way to the very right-hand side, right? Because he's like incredibly enthusiastically supportive, we're hoping. I'm just making that up as a guess as to where he might lie. So if he was incredibly supportive and incredibly influential, he would basically live all the way in the very top right corner of that map. If he was incredibly influential and we weren't sure how supportive he was, then he'd be at the top, but in the center. Make sense? So we've got PG&E kind of in that role. They're going to be incredibly influential. They have a massive amount of money and political influence. We're not sure how supportive they'll be. That's why they're in the middle. Some others that, are showing up here a bit. I forgot we did put these on, Johnny. Thank you. The lawn and landscape companies likely have a lot of political power and a lot of influence, and they're going to be very opposed, most likely, to this. They probably, as Johnny was saying, are going to be not terribly upfront about that opposition. It's likely to be phrased as things like, we really support this, but realistically, this needs to be done over the next 20 years because blank, 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 right? So they'll slow walk it. In the landscape workers, probably are supportive, probably not influential, but there might be a lot of them. So one of the things you can look for is, and we'll get into this maybe even more next week when you get to persuasive video, if there are large numbers of people who individually are not influential, but they're in large numbers, they can become influential if you organize them. So the landscape workers would be an example of that here, right? There are going to be a lot of landscape workers. They have the potential, if they were to act in unison, to be incredibly influential, but individually they're not. So they're over there as potentially high support, low influence. And they may not even be high support because it may take some education and outreach to move them from neutral to high support. So we don't know. Okay, so that's a power map. If you are doing an advocacy campaign, this is an essential step. So you can kind of put the name of the person you want to influence, the target of your advocacy. In this case, Micah would be the sort of name at the top of the chart if we were doing this. And then draw it out. For today, for the exercise, I know you'll be doing some guesswork, and that's okay. But if you are serious about doing advocacy on your topic, go research who are the actual human beings behind this. So we would replace, if we had time to do more research and we're going to move this into action, we would go from listing kind of generically lawn and landscape companies to listing the top few by name and maybe even the individuals there. As you think about last week's class around that sort of persuasive, using emotion and persuasion, the people on your power map are more likely to be the people you have that conversation with. Now, maybe we have the opportunity to go talk with Micah or submit a letter to Micah, this is the councilwoman, using that framework of story of self, story of us, story of now. Maybe we can make a video, maybe we can do an op-ed in the newspaper. There are a number of ways we might be able to reach her directly. But for the most part, we would be looking to send somebody to talk to each of these people on the power map and engage them with that same framework, that story of self, story of us, story of now, to get them engaged in our issue. Just a little bit of recap. What that would mean is if we were going to Corey Bytoff, we would choose, first of all, if we would look from our available advocacy team members, who's best able to connect with Corey Bytoff. Maybe somebody has a connection or somebody just has a lot in common with him. Great, that's who we would send to have that conversation. They use the story of self, us, and now to really up his level of motivation and make him feel excited and engaged and supported and able to do even more than he's maybe doing now. And we might choose somebody else to go to the leaders of the lawn and landscape companies. And if we think their opposition for financial reasons is just going to be entrenched, they're just maybe can be persuaded some, but they have so much financial stake in the matter, we may essentially be looking to demotivate them. There's a reminder from last week. So we're going and trying to have them put less energy into opposing the effort, because otherwise they may put a lot of money, energy, and influence into opposing bans on small off-road engines. So that's kind of how this plays into last week's class. Just wanted to mention that. Let's drop the screen share, Johnny. I want to see if anybody's got questions, and then we'll go into small groups and start working on this. Susan, go for it.
I had a question about the influence side of the power map. So I'm assuming that that means they either, I guess my main question is I don't understand why Barbara Heller is in the negative, since she's a longtime council member. And I would imagine she knows a lot of people and has, I feel like she would have more influence than the landscaping companies, for example. So that makes me think there's something I'm missing about that column.
Yeah, I put her there. I don't really know her. I just kind of looked up, and it definitely seems she has a huge history in city council. So maybe that
Right.
makes her like heavy influence. I figured she's no longer on the city council, and she's kind of, I think she's retiring from some of this work and stuff. So maybe she's not interested in participating. I just kind of,
Yeah.
partly I put her there because I needed to fill that box with
Okay.
somebody. So this is just an
Yeah.
example, but totally,
Okay.
you might be right, Susan.
Got it.
Like,
Yeah.
powerful.
I mean, the other thing that strikes me, just because we're into this particular issue, is that my perception in Marin is that a lot of the landscapers are independent. So I don't actually have a sense of there being big influential companies. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but I think that's what makes it a kind of interesting and complicated thing here, because a lot of the people have their money at stake and their health at stake, and so they're really got a lot of conflicts in terms of their best interests.
Mhm. And there could be, I haven't had a chance to look it up. So
Yeah.
we're partly spitballing with this map, right? We're just guessing where things might fall. We'd want to do more research and really see.
Yeah.
There could be something like a landscapers association in Marin. A lot of places have something like that. That might be the entity to look at rather than the individual landscaping companies. It might be, can we move the association into a less oppositional state in whatever way? The other thing I should mention on the power map, we talked about this ahead of time, Johnny and I. There, as you look at who has influence, this is why it's important to have an individual at the center of your power map. The people who have a lot of influence over an individual are going to be the most important people in their life. It's going to be their partner. It's going to be their close friends. It's going to be the people who they talk to after their yoga class every week. So if you really want to get into a major advocacy campaign, you'll see advocacy groups really map out who is influential here. And maybe we can't persuade the person directly, but we can go talk to their partner, or we can go, somebody knows their best two friends and can go talk with them and do the story of self, us, and now, and convince them to lean on the decision maker. So it depends a little bit on the scale of effort we need to put into things, but just to mention, that's an option. We didn't do it, felt a little bit too much like digging into somebody's personal life. But if you're dealing with a major powerful figure, it's a really important thing to look at. Who do they invite over to their house, and who do they have conversations with about this? Even if those people don't have any positional power, they're not the leader of anything, they're influential. So you'd look for that too. Peter, go for it. You are muted.
Okay, so I'm having trouble applying this map to my person and my issue, and it may be because of how I've defined the issue, because I'm concerned with increasing housing, particularly affordable housing in Fairfax, but doing it in a fire-safe fashion. And the person I've targeted is Chance Cutrano, who's a relatively young and new member of our council, who I think is going to be pretty open-minded and supportive. He does a lot of other good things. But when you juxtapose housing and fire safety, it's people who build houses and want to speculate and get their properties more valuable will definitely be opposed to any restrictions on housing. But I'm having trouble weaving together. It's basically two different issues, right? We want more housing, we want more affordable housing, but we want it to be done in such a fashion that people can still get out safely, and the people who are being surrounded by more people living around them can also get out safely in case of a wildfire. So I'm not sure, do I need to go back to the drawing boards and redefine my issue, or is there some other hybrid application of this power map that I can come up with?
So what you need to be able to do, and maybe the way to go on this, interestingly, I used to work with Chance Cutrano, by the way. He was an intern where I was working at a advocacy think tank. You want to go and see what specifically is it that you want this person to do differently. So in the case of Micah, our councilwoman, we aren't as specific as we ideally would be, but we're generally saying we want her to move from being supportive in concept to being really active and essentially being the leader within San Rafael of moving this forward. So start by figuring out exactly what you would want Chance Cutrano to do. And then you look at who would be influential around him on that specific decision, right?
Okay.
Positive and negative influence again, right? And if there's the possibility of a large number of people who individually are not influential, but may be really interested in what you have to say, then you look at how can they be organized? Are they already all members of some existing organization or association? You can mobilize them, or do we have to mobilize them ourselves independently with, we'll get to some of the tactics, petitions and other things. But yeah.
Good ideas. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? And then we'll go to breakout groups and you can build your power map.
Trevor, take a look at Carissa's comment in the chat.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Thank you. Yeah, Carissa, that's a great example. So that's the, I'll just read it in case anybody's not seeing it. Trump campaign's attack of Hunter Biden is a good example of influencing people close to the person in power, just in a negative way. Yeah, absolutely. It's a way to kind of try to demotivate and or distract the person in power. So hopefully we don't have to do that too much. It's sort of a, it's a dirty trick to do, but you know, if you're up against a bunch of powerful corporations that are going to put everything on the line to oppose you, you've got to find a way to influence them to decrease their level of activity in opposition. At least ideally you would. Otherwise, you've got to build up so much support in favor to outpower their influence, which can be hard to pull off. So unfortunately, I'm a big fan of using people's social networks to influence the really powerful players. So if I really need to influence for example, I used to have to do advocacy work around the World Bank. If I can figure out who are the people who get invited over to dinner by this particular decision maker, and I can find people to go talk with each of those people in a relatively short time frame to make sure that the next time everybody's sitting at the dinner table, this is a topic of conversation, I would absolutely do that. I hope that went well. We've got about half an hour left and I've got a lot I want to cover. So I'm going to just trust that the breakouts were productive and move on into the next rounds of content. That's our power map. Now, hopefully everybody more or less walked out of that with a very rough draft of a power map along the lines of the example we saw from Johnny. And if not, you know how to do it, right? So I can't emphasize enough how important this is. This will really help you move your issue from being an idea to being an actual plan of who is the decision maker you want to make a different decision, and who are all the people who can convince them to make that decision or not. So a few other notes. First of all, around coalition building. The power map plays into this as well. What you generally want to do is you don't want to approach advocacy issues alone as an individual. You want the biggest coalition you can pull together with this sort of time and resources you have available. The power map would kind of give you a sense of who that coalition might be. So you're looking at everybody on the supportive side of that chart. That's your coalition. And you want to tie as many together as possible, even those that are low on the influence. So in our example, the individual employees of landscaping companies are low on influence, but there are enough of them that if we can build a coalition that includes many employees of landscaping companies, that starts to add up and become a big deal. If there are many homeowners who, for various reasons, whether it's the pollution or the noise pollution of small off-road engines, they might be members of your coalition. So you want to really build that up and create some level of coalition. There's a lot more that could be said about coalition building, but we'll have to leave the rest of that. Then we start to move into the actual tactics. So how do you get your message to the decision makers? And what is the best way to share your emotion, again, so that they understand why you care at the very least? And hopefully that engages their own emotion so that they start to care. So tactics. There are a lot of ways to go about this. Oops. First of all, there's the question of who's the best messenger. There's a good chance it's not you. So as you build your coalition, you want to build a fairly diverse coalition as best you can so that you have people on your team who are a good fit to go influence all those other people on your power map. That may mean you need to train them. So you may be building a coalition and then providing people training, for example, on how to do persuasive speaking or persuasive writing. So that's an important piece to look at how you might do. It's best to do advocacy as a team. So if you can present as part of a coordinated team, it is way more effective than acting alone. Here's an example of that. If you were to go into let's say you were going into a town council meeting. This is a structure I used a lot in some of the years where I was in town council meetings and county commissioner meetings pretty much every day. You want to organize a team of people that might be a mix of professional staff of organizations and just individual citizens who care about the issue. People who you've reached with some level of outreach to find out they really have some passion around this. A typical structure that we use in advocacy work is to have whoever your best and most kind of authoritative technical expert is, have them potentially speak first, right? We don't always follow the sort of the logos, pathos, and then the now piece in that order, but you can, right? So you might start with your most authoritative expert to go in the example of small off-roads engines, to show a bunch of graphs and charts and say, look, this is why this issue matters. Here's the health impacts of it. Here's the, all of the other ways that this matters. Then you follow that with a bunch of emotional stories. That's where we would often invite in as many citizens as we could get in support of our issue. And you'd have each one with, a little bit of training. We would invite them to come see us for like an hour before going to the council meeting to do a little bit of practice of kind of doing that open-hearted sharing and to share their story of why this really matters to them, whatever that might be. You have as many of them go as there's time for in this council meeting. And then you have a last speaker who emphasizes the now part, right? And partly this, by the way, is built around the fact that in a lot of these public meetings, there's a time limit to speaking, but there's not a number limit to the number of different people who can speak. That's taking advantage of that structure. Your last speaker who comes in and emphasizes the what to do now might be you as the leader of the advocacy effort, good chance. If in the case of a more professional advocacy organization like I was the executive director, that was usually me. So I was usually the last one to go up and speak and kind of say, given all of the really clearly laid out expertise from our experts, given all of these passionate stories from your citizens, from your voters, from whoever, again, we would get the most influential people we could, from donors to your cause, from the major corporation XY that is in support, whatever it might be. Therefore, we ask you to take the following actions now. And that's where that would come in. And you would start with something small and manageable. Can you do this thing within the next week? And then you'll kind of build on that now from there. You might line it out. If I was putting together a really big team like this for a public meeting, we might make a request of a now that is sort of a year-long project and make sure that there's something that's a deliverable within the next week or so. So we ask you to commit to XYZ thing over the next year and to do this sort of step one on it within the next week. So that is how that might look in a council meeting, but you can do versions of this in other ways. And next week we're going to get into advocacy videos. I'm not leading that because I am the opposite of a technical expert on things like computers. But you could do the same thing. So you could make a video that used the same approach. You would start the video with some background and expertise around the issue. Here's math, and here's economics, and here's health data. You could follow it with a bunch of personal stories that really connect to the heartstrings and have the last part of the video conclude with the, therefore, here's what we want you to do now, right? So and as you look at power mapping, you're going to be including some of the folks from your power map in this. The critical thinking is going to be your most influential expert who's on your power map. Your emotional stories may be the larger number of people and just those who can express passion. And whoever is that last speaker, good chance it's you or whoever is the leader of the advocacy effort.
Sorry, I always have questions, but you know, this is super interesting, and I'm thinking in terms of those of us who've, you know, brought all our own ideas and particular things that we want to advocate for. You know, does it really make sense for us to start at the level of trying to build a team and do all those things, or should we think in terms of finding a team that already exists and then bringing, you know, our energy and skills to that team? And I mean, I still think this is all very useful to know, because if you become a part of a team, you should know about leadership and organization. But you know what I'm saying, though?
Yeah, definitely. So look, the overall trajectory of this training is we're training you how to lead an advocacy effort.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that your next first move should be to lead an advocacy.
Yeah,
it might be really much better to go work as a member of a team that already has a track record doing this. It's just for you to have the background in what it would look like if you were to.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, go, you know, if you can find an existing coalition, if you can find an existing expert, an existing advocacy professional, or somebody who's already interested in this topic and get them on it, heck yeah.
Yeah.
And you can play a support role and ask, you know, learn from them and so forth.
Yeah, got it.
Options for advocacy delivery. It's kind of funny wording. I could reword that. Look, these are tactics. What are the different sort of methodologies that exist for engaging in advocacy? There are many, and obviously we're not going to be able to go into them in depth, but I just want to give you a sense, and we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each. There's a speech, and a lot of the past training around advocacy in EFM and elsewhere has focused on the ability to deliver a public speech in a public meeting, whether that's a school board or a town council or the county supervisors or whatever. That can be really effective. It's also really scary. It can be a hard place to start. It can be hard to get as many people to participate in that. So, you know, in my ideal version, I was showing you around team advocacy structure, you bring a whole bunch of people to just the right moment at a public meeting where it's, you know, they're about to decide on their budget, they're about to decide on some issue, and you pack the room with a bunch of people to just hammer this particular issue. It's incredibly effective. It's also a lot of work to pull off, right? And it takes a lot of motivation from the people you're looking to bring in. You have to really build up that emotion part to where this is worth their time and effort and dealing with the scariness of public speaking. So speaking at a public meeting is a powerful option when you can pull it off. It reminds me a little bit of what we talked about with anger. Don't overuse it. This is something that is very taxing for people. It can be very taxing on you. It can be very taxing for the citizens or other folks you're looking to involve. It's a big ask. It's scary. And so you want to build some trust in your network. Again, assuming you're the leader of an advocacy effort, right? Which hopefully you're instead going to go do an apprenticeship and learn some there. But if you're the leader, you want to be really sparing in when you ask people to show up to a council meeting and do a public speech. You also don't want to wear out the public officials, frankly. If you show up to every public meeting with 15 people, they'll eventually move from being really impressed and moved to not so pleased to see you, which isn't good. So use this sparingly and use it well, is I guess what I want to say. It's kind of like the powerful tool you pull out once in a while at just the right moment, turn out the biggest, most prepared team you can, and really go for it. And then otherwise, let people engage in lower energy ways of doing advocacy. Email and other kinds of ways of doing message can work. So for example, we could take the council member that we talked about in San Rafael, and we could organize a whole bunch of people to send an email at around the same time on the same topic. Let's say everybody this week, send a message this week that covers these points, and you give people enough background that they're relatively consistent in their ask. They might, again, this is a way to kind of use the same thing. They might tell their personal story. Hey, I really care about this issue because blank, blank, blank in my life. And therefore, I want to add my voice in support of measure A. Please vote yes, right? So you could go to the decision maker with a bunch of emails. That's also true. You could email the CEO of a company. It's a medium ask. It's not as scary for a lot of people. They don't have to go anywhere. It is not as powerful, right? So it's one of these things where if you need to move somebody a little bit, getting a whole bunch of emails can be enough to push them from, let's say, supportive but inactive to supportive and active, or from neutral to supportive. It's kind of a medium option here. Web posts and videos, I particularly have been seeing a lot of work, and it's why I think for the first time now, EFM is going to do a persuasive video training. That's what we've got up next week. Those have gotten more and more doable as the technology in cell phones has made it more manageable to record a pretty high quality video, edit it, and so on. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool. There's a lot of excellent advocacy work being done by video. You can, again, use the same framework. If you were the only one to speak, you can do your story of self, us, and now in video form, but maybe at the site. So we talked with the Spanish-speaking group that we did with EFM a couple months ago about possibly going to the site where there is a whole bunch of trash that needs to be collected and gathered, and doing a video there of, hey, I'm so-and-so. This is what my neighborhood looks like. This is why it really is a problem for us, my kids, and however that is, and therefore we want you to do this thing. Having that be a video, again, a bunch of those videos, maybe instead of or in addition to emails to the decision makers, could be really powerful. Or you can do a more polished video, which I guess is what we'll probably do more of next week, that might involve multiple voices, might be more edited. You can kind of see. A lot of what I would say on this, on any of these, it's important that you make a lot of action happen in a narrow band of time. If you were to have a decision maker get one video a week for 20 weeks, it might move them. But if you could have them get 20 videos in 2 weeks, much more likely. Same if it's 20 emails in 2 weeks rather than 20 emails over 20 weeks. Petition. That is very little work for the members who need to sign the petition, quite a lot of work for whoever is organizing and leading the petition campaign. Depends if that's trying to, if you're doing this with getting signatures in person, that's a different level of effort. I would say for this, petitions work particularly well on an issue that feels pretty obvious to people, where with reading a couple sentences or hearing a couple sentences from whoever is asking them to sign the petition, they're like, yeah, I can support that, right? So it works well on really simple issues where you can get large numbers of people to quickly be persuaded to take the minute to sign the petition. If it's a more complex issue, petition's probably not the place to start, because you'll lose too much time and energy trying to get people to understand the issue before they're willing to sign a petition. And petitions generally have the most impact when they just have a bazillion signatures. So keep it really simple. If your petition can be 2 paragraphs at most, great. The shorter, the better. It's mostly about how many hundreds and thousands of signatures you can get on it. If it just says, we want you to ban small off-road engines, signed 5,000 people, that's going to be pretty effective versus a really sophisticated petition with 100 signatures. Not as good, no matter how good the content of that petition might be. Facebook, personally, I don't use Facebook for my personal life for a number of reasons, but I have used it in advocacy work. I've often, of course, hired staff who are really good at Facebook to manage that. So I'm not the expert in using Facebook. I would say it's primarily a place to try to build up your team. So it's to reach out to those who are supportive, who may not individually have much power or influence, and start to gather them so that you can use them at that key moment. Whether it's, hey, now is the time, all of you who've sort of expressed interest, to send this email or to attend this public meeting or to upload a video of your neighborhood, no more than 1 minute, using the following guidelines, whatever that might be. So I'd say it's mostly a building a support of the masses tool and seeing what you can do to try to create some unified effort and voice among individuals. So I think that might be, yeah, that's it in terms of slides and the sharing. And we've got a few minutes and we can just kind of discuss a little bit how this might apply. Oh, we've got a couple of things in chat. Sorry, I couldn't see all of these when I was at it. From Tracy, can you play a video at a council meeting? I'm wondering if you can leverage critical thinking facts from a video if you don't have technical experts on hand. Sometimes. I don't know how it is currently in Marin, but probably right now they're allowing people to participate in public meetings via Zoom. And once you're on Zoom, you can, well, you'd have to ask permission to share your screen. I'm not sure. If you're there in person, when I did a lot of these kinds of meetings, you generally need permission and kind of some of the technical stuff to be lined up in advance, and it's harder to pull off. Can be done. If I'm going to go to that level of effort to get a video at a council meeting, that's probably more of a polished piece. Like we put together a 5-minute video and we want you to see it, and it's got 10 voices of different people in it or whatever. Anything else around council? Does anybody else know, by the way, around council meetings and the ability to do video? Anybody done this recently?
It's not, they're not showing video. I don't think you can do video, but when you speak, they don't even show your picture. So it makes it a lot easier to even just talk without showing your face, which is kind of nice.
All right, great.
I was at a board of supervisors. I think they said you could have slides, but I didn't see anybody who could technically work it out. Didn't seem like it was easy. So I think it's, yeah, I think it depends.
Yeah, okay. I haven't done a lot of presentation to councils in the last 5 years since I moved to Marin, but as of 6 years ago, it wasn't worth the effort to try to go through all the hoops it would take to get the thing ready to be projected onto their screen at their meeting. And it was more effective to just get a bunch of human beings in front of them to speak really well about the issue. From Lara, my sense of council meetings is that you can talk all you want, but you don't get any replies since they never respond to the issue you're bringing up. That can be true, Lara. There's usually a time limit on how much you can talk. I don't know if that's what you mean, but yeah, you could have 20 people go speak passionately about the issue and then the council could just completely ignore it. That's why I guess I would say it's really important to pick your moment, because if you take 20 people to speak and the council doesn't even address the issue, your 20 people are going to be really frustrated. So if you're expecting that to be the response, that is not the time to take your 20 people to the council. You would want to find a council member who is interested, who is engaged, who can tell you, hey, we want you to come, like let's say we take Micah, our example from the town council in San Rafael. We think she's supportive. So we might get to where we have a relationship with her and she says, hey, we want you to show up at the council meeting on November 14th at 4 p.m. And that's the time where if you can bring 20 people to say this, it will impact us because we're going to be making a decision in that meeting or the following week after that meeting. You need some of that inside information. Otherwise, yeah, if we all just went to a council meeting now, everybody on this call, and spoke really passionately about small off-road engines, you probably get a bit of a blank stare because they'd be like, huh, that's not really what we're planning to do here today. So let's see, Tracy, you want to just speak this piece about I think Lara, the issue Lara raised? Go ahead, Tracy. Oh, you're having audio issues. Okay. I think she says, I think the issue Lara raised is sometimes boards cannot respond or discuss unless something is on the agenda already. Yeah. So I guess first you need to get something on the agenda, and how do you do that? That's what I'm getting at with that statement about, like, you want somebody on the inside to tell you it's this particular day is the time to come and speak because it's on the agenda. So yeah. And then Tracy, you also posted a question here. What is the role of letters to the editor in terms of tactics? Actually, Lara, I see you're off mute. Do you have anything you want to add about the question you were asking? Did we cover it?
I think that Tracy's answer is correct, that they don't respond. I mean, you can have 20 people bring up 20 issues before the meeting and none of them get a response or an action. So on the other hand, if they are making a decision about your local park or your trash collection or whatever, then they will be listening to your input. So it's very hard to get things on the agenda. So, you know, how do you bring up all these other things? Having one-on-one meetings with council members is great, but I find that all of these people are wildly busy and you can't get that. Yep. You have to rely on the emails and the 3 minutes and whatever else you can manage.
Agreed. And a couple of things I would say. First of all, it can be hard to have one-on-one meetings with, let's say, all of the council members, but you might be able to get a one-on-one meeting with the technical staff member who's in charge of the issue you're interested in, and have them tell you which council members to talk to when, if any, or if it's not you, who they might recommend. You know, they might say, hey, can you get so-and-so to come talk to the council members, the leader of such and such thing. So that's where the power mapping really comes in. Yeah, individually, us going and trying to talk one-on-one to all the people is going to be exhausting and maybe not that effective. So you want to see, like, who's around them that can do some more of that talking and be more effective with it. And the other thing I would say, this has become a lot of my work as I do leadership training for social change leaders. I would really encourage you to look at highly strategic, more intensive advocacy work. So one of the mistakes that people often make in advocacy is we have a hopefully fairly sustained passion around the issue. We care about it over the long run. And that often translates into a sustained low intensity advocacy campaign where you're just kind of, you know, climate change is a great example. You're just kind of constantly worried about it, bringing it up a lot, trying to kind of, you know, move it into things. And it's hard to have as much impact with that. And it can burn out both you as the advocate and anybody you're trying to bring together in your coalition. So finding the right moment and doing a more intense action is often the way to go. So with a lot of the social change leaders, it's moving them away from a model of this kind of just like sustained, you know, making noise all the time until the noise isn't even noticed anymore, to making a whole lot of noise on just the right day, just the right moment to just the right people. So I'll just encourage that in general. And Tracy, that goes to your question around the role of letters to the editor. Yeah, but that should be as part of, it should be one note of your orchestra in your advocacy campaign, right? You want there to suddenly be a whole lot of noise on this issue. A letter to the editor floating by itself without all of the other instruments playing more or less in sync, meaning letters to the elected official, videos, you know, all sorts of community organizing, the ability to show up in a public meeting, all of those kinds of things. You want as many as possible lined up to happen in the shortest time frame possible, and that time frame is really strategically chosen by having some allies inside who can tell you when that right moment is. And there's almost always some allies inside, whether it's a, you know, it's a staff member or it's the intern of a staff member, but there's going to be somebody who you can get to be supportive and can tell you when that right moment is. And then you just get everybody organized and to kind of hold their energy for that moment so that you don't end up having this just sort of ongoing low level noise, and instead have a really concerted effort at that right moment. All right, other questions? Laura?
The issue I'm struggling with my chosen project is that I tend to, I mean, this is kind of esoteric, so shut me up if you need to. I tend to think in bigger picture, and the group I'm trying to change is very focused on their one issue. On the other hand, what they're doing is affecting the bigger picture. They're just not stepping back to see that. And I find that to be a very difficult place to talk and negotiate, because they just keep coming back to their little direct focus. They're not sort of stepping back and seeing how it fits into a bigger picture.
I get it.
Any advice?
Yeah, I deal with this a lot. So a lot of social change leaders see the big picture, and it's why they're interested in creating larger scale change in the world, right?
Yeah.
Most of the people whose minds we want to change are not in the habit of looking at the bigger picture, probably not just in terms of the issue you're thinking of, but often in general. And I would say, accept that and play to that as a strength. So instead of trying to get them to see the bigger picture, which can be really difficult, get them to see a small aspect. You see the big picture, right? And so you want to say, here's an aspect of the bigger picture that I think I can get this group to see and take action on, and just make it really small and really manageable. You know, there's a much longer version of this training I used to teach in university. It's called Local Action, Global Change. You've probably all heard this phrase, right? Another way to look at that is, you as an advocate, you want an eye on the global, but really it's about finding those ultra specific things that you can get people to do, and just get them to understand that. They don't need to understand the global in order to be effective at the really small scale. So in the small groups, I was working with Kim and Tracy, and Kim, we were talking about what it might be like to run a series of really short advocacy campaigns directed at homeowners associations to just get them to change what they do around pesticides. We don't need them to necessarily understand the bigger picture. Just go and work with the fact that they might be kind of a one issue mindset. Make this their issue for a little while, and then move on to the next HOA with your lessons learned, and then the next one after that. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you all for working with me over the last 3 weeks. It's been a delight. I'd love to hear how it goes, and if you're able to go do some advocacy, either by leading it the way we kind of were testing it out here, or signing up to support an advocacy effort on your issues. I would love to hear about it.